I always tell people that recovery is not an event, it's a process. And that's where our continuum of care is very helpful in helping people reach that fulfilling life that they seek when they come to us. The important thing about going through the recovery process is understanding that you're not alone. There's a multitude of people here to help you feel loved and wanted, and that's important that you understand that together we thrive.
At Virtava Health Mississippi, our priority is to help individuals attain a life of freedom from substance use disorders. As a leading, fully accredited inpatient recovery facility in the greater Memphis area, we are here to empower families and individuals to live out their best future. We understand that everyone's situation is different, and we meet people where they are. Our on-site team of physicians and licensed therapists create customized evidence-based treatment plans for each patient. We offer several activities including art, yoga, volleyball, and swimming, and provide nutritious meals prepared by our on-site culinary team. You can count on us to be your support network, even after graduating from our treatment program. Our exclusive alumni community was created to provide valuable resources and connection for those who have completed treatment with us. Our integrated care model includes inpatient detoxification, inpatient residential treatment, partial hospitalization programming, intensive outpatient programming, and virtual care, so patients can get the treatment that's right for them. Lifelong recovery is possible, and we are here to ensure you complete treatment with the tools and resources you need to live out your best future. If you or a loved one is struggling with substance use, we're here to help. Call us today and speak to one of our admissions specialists, available 24 hours a day at 1-877-VIRTAVA.
All right, that's about all the videos you'll see today. But I'd like to roll back to the second one with the fried chicken and the pecan pie. I'm kind of stuck right there. Your next presenter today is Mr. Nathan Payne, M-A-C-R-C-P-R-S. And besides having great style, Nathan sort of buried one of the leads in his bio. He is a recent graduate of the Mental Health Counseling Program at Tennessee Tech University, and he loves all things outdoors. Nathan is a person in long-term recovery and serves as the director of collegiate recovery with the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. Prior to this, Nathan had worked with the department doing community outreach for those struggling with substance use and developed the Tennessee Collegiate Recovery Initiative. Welcome to the stage now, Nathan Payne.
Right on, right on. Yeah, my name's Nathan Payne. I'm putting my phone up here because I used to introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Nathan Payne. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I used to, when I introduced myself, I'd say I'm a person in long-term college as well. And I'm going to do my best to hang out next to this microphone, but I like to move around a lot when I talk. So that's going to be interesting. You may see me. Yeah, can I do that? That'd be killer, dude. Sweet. Can you guys, yeah, it's working. All right. That's awesome. I was sitting here listening to the other presenters and I was like, what am I going to do? Because I do like to move around a bunch and I talk with my hands, and so it can be kind of awkward when I have to stay in one place. But yeah, I used to introduce myself as a person in long-term college as well. And it surely felt like I was. When I got into recovery, I was 20 years old, and I started college back just because I was trying to figure out if I had any brain cells left. Because I was 100% not certain whether or not I did. And a lot of times whenever I speak, I make jokes, and sometimes they're kind of dark jokes, but if you find them funny, you can totally laugh. It's not going to hurt my feelings. If I say something that you think is funny, you are not going to hurt my feelings. So please do that, because I'm still holding out on the fact that that I'm a funny guy, and it makes me feel better when you do laugh at me, or with me, rather, not at me. But I say the thing about college, one, because I'm the Collegiate Recovery Initiative Director, but also because I remember like one of the most painful experiences of college was when I would be looking at the clock and it would be time to leave, but the professor would not shut up. And like, I'm just sitting there and I start to feel it physically. I want to like come out of my chair, and then you start trying to like tell them with your eyes, like, please be quiet. So I'm putting my phone up here to check the time periodically. That's what I'm doing if I wander back over here, because I want to make sure that we leave on time. And I do not want to be that guy who holds us over because he thought what he had to say was, so important that he had to stay for 10 or 15 more minutes. What I have to say, I can say in 20, 30 minutes, an hour and a half, whatever window you give me. We're going to go through a little bit today of the Recovery Ally training. And the Recovery Ally training is something that I do on college campuses all across the state. It's something that I put together with a partnership from Kennesaw State and Virginia Commonwealth University. And what I mean by that is whenever we were starting to do the Tennessee Collegiate Recovery Initiative and starting to try and figure out like, okay, so, I wanted to do outreach on college campuses. I approached the commissioner and I was like, hey, I'd like to do outreach on college campuses and, take a lot of the things that we've learned from our faith-based initiative and apply that to college campuses. And she was like, that's great. Give me a proposal in 2 days. I was like, oh, okay. It just got really quick. But when we started trying to figure out how to do that, right, I was like, so where do we start? Like, what's the fundamental thing, right? And one of the things that I found is on these college campuses that there was no shortage of individuals who wanted to help, right? I don't think that we have, we certainly need more individuals who want to help, more individuals who want to advocate, but there's a lot of folks who want to help. There's a lot of folks who want to help those struggling with substance use. Like, it's been amazing. I've been in recovery for it'll be 10 years, October 31st, 2000. Yeah, so this year. I was about to say my sobriety day. Appreciate that. At least I got scooped into getting clean. I still do, to see if I get a laugh every now and then. Because most people don't laugh at that corny joke. But so I've been in recovery almost 10 years, right? And I've been amazed to see the shift that's happened in our society to talking about these things more, just in the 10 years that I've been in recovery. So I think we're moving in a good direction. I think there's people that want to help, but I think that these issues like substance misuse, suicide, suicidal ideations, mental health, mental illness, all of these things hit really close to home. Like, these are really intimate conditions. And they expose us to some of the darker parts of the human experience. But we are all connected with it in some way, right? I think we would be very hard pressed if I did a show of hands, which I'm not going to do that. It's another thing that I don't enjoy, when people ask you to raise your hand or any audience participation. But if I did a show of hands of individuals in here who have been touched by substance misuse, and partly that can be because of what this conference is, but individuals who've been touched by suicidal ideation or suicide, loss of a loved one, or mental health, or mental illness, we would be hard pressed to find someone who hadn't been touched by these things. So they're very intimately intertwined in our experience, right? And there's a lot of pain associated with them a lot of times. And I think that when stuff is that painful, and when stuff is that complicated, sometimes it's just easier not to talk about it, because I don't know how to talk about it. And so the Recovery Ally training was put together with the hopes of instilling more confidence in individuals and dispelling some of the myths about recovery. One myth that I'm particularly passionate about dispelling, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I believe that there's always a place for somebody who has struggled with substance misuse to help somebody who is struggling with substance misuse, right? There's a connection. that can happen that is hard to find anywhere else. But I don't believe that people who haven't struggled with substance misuse can't help. I don't believe that. I believe we all play a part, right? So the recovery ally training is a way that I try to convey that on college campuses. Because one of the things that I found that was really interesting is that colleges, so there was a recent study done by the Healthy Minds, and that's a study that comes out of Michigan, I believe, but they do it on college campuses all across the state, right? And so they interview all these students and they ask them things like, would you reach out for help? Do you feel like you would look at your fellows differently for reaching out for help? When's the last time that you sought help for mental health, for substance use, all of these things, right? And so 6% of the students indicated that they would view somebody differently for reaching out to get help. So that's not bad, right? I don't know how many people, 6% of you guys are going to look at somebody differently. I don't know who you are, but I'm judging you right now. I'm looking at you differently. But 46% of the students said they felt like they would be viewed differently for reaching out to get help. Said they thought that they would be perceived differently by their fellows for reaching out to get help with substance use, mental health, suicidal thoughts or ideations or any of those things. So there's a stigma that still exists on college campuses, and I feel like it's quite prominent because I feel like one of the ways that colleges have historically responded to this is either A, pretend like it doesn't exist, or B, disciplinary action and just get the problem out of the house. And so I found it really interesting when I started doing this outreach that an institution that's dedicated to a higher learning, pushing an individual upwards, that there's still such a significant stigma surrounding these topics on these campuses. This is my contact info. You've already heard a little bit about who I am, so I'm just gonna not spend much time on that. One of the things that we do when we do the recovery ally trainings, we talk about the problem, we work on broadening our understanding, and we discuss the solution. So part of the problem, part of the need, is that substance use, binge drinking, alcohol use, all of these things are on the rise with young adults, and young adults clear the board on these things. So things like binge drinking and alcohol use are actually higher in individuals that are attending college that are young adults than young adults who are not attending college, which that seems, pretty somewhat intuitive. And that number up there, which you guys, I may be preaching to the choir here, but the 24% of young adults that meet the criteria for substance use disorder, that number is actually 2% higher in Tennessee. 26% of young adults meet the criteria for a substance use disorder in Tennessee. So that's a little above the national average. And one of the things that I do, the goal of the recovery ally training is to enable individuals to see that they play a role, no matter their prior affiliation, no matter their story, no matter what motivates them to come to that training, they have a part to play in someone's recovery if they choose to. And one of the ways that I think we can figure out how we can connect with individuals, how we can develop deeper places of empathy for individuals who struggle with substance use is by recognizing our own spots of pain, right? By recognizing our own struggles. Because you may not know what it's like to develop a substance use disorder. I really hope that you don't. You may not know what it's like to struggle with suicidal ideations or to struggle with your mental health so bad that you can't get out of bed, right? I hope that you don't know these things. But one of the fundamental components of these experiences is profound pain and profound loneliness and feelings of isolation and feeling that nobody understands you around you. And we all know what that feels like to some extent, right? So I include this data here. This was from the ETSU. It was done in 2020. And I don't know if it was done like in the midst of COVID or post-COVID or what, because I've had several people ask me that. So I don't know how skewed that is, but I think that it's pretty prevalent to talking about developing a path for greater connection to mention this study. Because what this study shows, they did this random survey of Tennesseans, and nearly over half of the Tennesseans reported feeling nervous and anxious or on edge in the 7 days prior to taking the survey. Over half reported having trouble sleeping. 43% of Tennesseans reported feeling depressed, and 43% of Tennesseans reported feeling lonely. So, you know, that's a pretty significant number, right? So we're not as far removed from these things as we may think that we are. So I'm a person in long-term recovery, right? I didn't know what I was experiencing at the time, but I know that now looking back on my addiction, on my substance use, I know that I was incredibly lonely. I felt incredibly isolated. I mean, I know there were times where people would ask me why I was doing the things that I do, and I just felt like I was the only person in the world that felt that, right? And so one of the ways to foster recovery and to foster success in recovery is develop greater connection and to sort of get rid of that terminal uniqueness. But we have to meet individuals where they're at if we're going to see them be successful, right? So being like, look, I know like what it's like. I felt lonely before. Like, I know what it's like to feel this kind of pain, and I'm here to help you. I'm here to be your ally. Suicidal thoughts in young adults are on the rise as well. It's the highest among any age group. So nearly 12% of young adults had serious thoughts of suicide in 2020. To me, it's like, okay, so that's 12%, so that's not a lot, but that's a lot, right? Like 12% of young adults in the country had serious thoughts of suicide in 2020. And I think that that if we have conversations like this and we continue to have conversations like this, we can see that number change, right? Because secrets grow in the dark and secrets keep us sick and all that stuff. And I believe that. So what we're trying to do on college campuses is bridge the gap. So I'm a person in long-term recovery. I attend 12-step meetings as a part of my recovery support. I think they're the gold standard of recovery support in the community. I'm in no way representative of them. I'm just another fool on the bus trying to stay sober one day at a time whenever I'm in a meeting. I say that to say this is not a dig on these programs, right? But when I got into recovery, I just kind of had to accept that the really grumpy 75-year-old guy in the corner was going to be my new best friend because there were no other young adults around in the town that I got sober in. And it's that way in a lot of places, right? So Memphis has a pretty rad young adult population in the recovery community, but there's a lot of places where, I mean, the young adult population is just not present. And what we see when we look at the internal surveys that Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous have done, so these are, you know, non-affiliated organizations, right? So they can't have like an outside investigator come in, but they do their own internal surveys of demographic data. And what we see is that the average age of membership is 46 to 50 years old. The young adult population makes up anywhere from 1 to 12% or 1 to 14% of the overall fellowship. Under the age of 21 is just 1% in Narcotics Anonymous. So I don't see collegiate recovery programs as replacing these forms of recovery support. I see them as bridging the gap between the young adult community and traditional forms of recovery support. Because you only have people here for, ideally, I know that I spent like 9 years in college, but that's not usually the norm. I'm not a doctor. But when we talk about being an ally, allyship can take many forms, right? I'm just gonna do a quick time check. Right on. So allyship can take many forms, right? But the most important thing about being an ally is that you come from a place of compassion and a desire to understand that individual's story. That's the thing about this training too. I feel like, or I don't feel like I know at times individuals have come up to me and it's like, man, this is just about being a better human. This isn't about like, I'm not training you to fix anybody. I can't fix anybody. I'm, you know, in process of pursuing licensure for mental health counseling. I know I can't fix anybody, right? Like that was one of my favorite things that I learned when I started the mental health counseling program is they were like, you know, it's not your job to fix people. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. Like I was sitting there in my first semester just like, what am I can't even fix myself half the time. What am I going to do? They're like, it's your job to listen, right? It's our job to connect and to give a person space, right? And so that's all it is with being an ally. It's just about connecting, man. It's just about learning how to listen and really truly honoring that person's story. Because the cool thing about when we can honor somebody's story, when we can give them space to tell it. So I used to work in one of my first jobs in the treatment field was at a residential facility. I was a psychiatric technician, and I loved that job because before that I was a front desk clerk at La Quinta Inn and Suites. And when you're talking to girls, it sounds way cooler to be like, I'm a psychiatric technician, instead of being like, well, I'm a front desk clerk at La Quinta Inn and Suites. So it was great. I loved it. But one of the things that I was always amazed of is that individuals, like there was nobody who came in there that didn't have a story to tell, right? Like everybody was carrying around this story. Everybody was carrying around this culmination of experience and pain and hurt that they wanted to feel heard. Like they wanted somebody to hear that story. And I think that the cool thing about giving an individual that space to tell that story is then we can help them recognize how resilient they really are. Because I can't in and of myself recognize how resilient I am. I have to bounce that off of you, right? Resiliency is like a muscle. It has to be grown over time. And one of the ways that I do that is in sharing with you the pain that I've been through. And then you can help me recognize that I'm still standing, right? You can convince me of that better than I can convince myself. It has to start with you. Because I've tried to convince myself of it, right? I'm constantly trying to do things on my own, like just bullheaded. And I need other people. I need other people to know the value that I have. And so that's what being an ally is about. It's about raising awareness. It's about being willing to continue education, to learn more about the stuff that we're talking about here today, to learn more about substance use with young adults. Being willing to communicate the skills that we've learned to others. And one of the things that I always make space to talk about is this advocacy piece, right? So for me, like when I take a personality exam, I'm like 49% introverted and 51% extroverted. So you never know what you're gonna get with me. I can stand up here for some reason and do this and feel fairly comfortable doing it. But then like you may think, wow, like I bet that guy's easy to talk to. And you never know, we could have a conversation after this and I'm just completely awkward. For some reason, advocacy on the larger scale has always been more comfortable for me than advocacy on the smaller scale. But the two are equally important, right? And what I mean when I say that is standing up in front of a room full of people and saying, hey, like we need to reduce stigma. We need to look at these things differently. We need to talk about these things on college campuses. It's comfortable, right, for me. But when I'm in a one-on-one or, you know, there's 3 or 4 of us in a conversation and maybe somebody starts talking about something, maybe perpetuating a stigma, maybe talking about something that I know to be wrong, and I know to be doing a disservice to that population that they're talking about, stepping out of my comfort zone and saying, hey, bro, like, you know, maybe don't talk like that. Like, you know, maybe trying to say a little better than that. That's another reason why those are uncomfortable, because I usually say stuff wrong. But you know, maybe like we should try and figure out another way to say that, dude, because you're potentially perpetuating the stigma there. That's always more uncomfortable for me than advocacy on a large scale, right? Because for me, I feel exposed and I feel seen in that conversation. Up here, oddly enough, I feel like I can hide out in front of a group of people, right? I can, if somebody's not making a facial expression that is, you know, agreeable, I can just move on to the next person. Like you, I don't know what you're thinking right now, but I can just move on to the next person, you know? So being willing to advocate on all scales is important. Other examples of allyship. Once again, I can't reiterate it enough. The most important thing about being an ally to an individual, and this in and of itself cultivates stigma reduction, is to honor and help students find their story. And that promotes resiliency. Other ways, incorporate recovery into the class. So I give a syllabus example in this training usually, and I think that's a really subtle way to cultivate stigma reduction. A recovery ally is not, oh, is everybody laughing at that graphic? I was like, man, did I like my fly over or something? Something happened? A A recovery ally is not account. I keep forgetting that I put funny graphics in here, so it always throws me off when people laugh at it. A recovery ally is not a counselor, case manager, recovery coach, marital counselor, sponsor, lender, any of these things, right? We're just talking about how to connect with individuals greater. We're talking about how to allow individuals to feel heard. You're not going to be a trained professional at the end of the recovery ally training. Whoa, that went quick. There we go. All right, we're back on track now. Quick side note about this graphic. Somebody was, I talk about substance use disorder. I'm not going to do much on it today, just for the sake of time, but I talk about it in the traditional recovery ally training. Somebody was asking me about what happens in the brain when individuals use video games or cell phones, and I was like, man, dude, don't nitpick my graphic, okay? I just thought it was a catchy graphic. I don't know actually what happens. So if you have questions about that, I'm not your guy. I know what happens when you use a drug, very basically, because when I got into recovery, I was really eager to understand what was happening in my brain whenever I was doing drugs, right? But I don't know what happens when you use a video game. So the ACEs study. So when I talk about substance use disorder, when I do this recovery ally training, the goal is to communicate some of the ways in which a substance use disorder can develop, some of the things that can contribute to a substance use disorder developing, some of the things that can contribute to an individual struggling with suicide or suicidal ideations, some of the environmental factors, some of the stuff that happens in the brain, and then some of the ways that we have traditionally looked at substance use disorder in our society or in our culture. So one of the things I always make space to talk about is the ACEs study. And really, if I say nothing more about ACEs, and I would assume that a fair amount of people in here are familiar with this study, but if I say nothing more about it, is that we need to stop asking what's wrong with you and we need to start asking what happened. And that is tough for me at times still, right? It is so easy, and this is another reason why I think that it's difficult to talk about substance use, and it's difficult to reduce stigma associated with substance use. And like I said, I feel like we're getting way better, but it is still difficult because some of the behaviors that is associated with this disorder are really hard to understand. It was really tough for my family to understand why I was living the way that I was living when I had every opportunity not to live that way. But we have to stop judging individuals by their behavior, and we have to learn the full story, right? We can't cast somebody out based on the behavior, right? We have to learn the full story. When I'm talking to an individual and I'm looking to support an individual who's sitting across from me, I have to understand that there is a whole culmination of events that have led them to be right there across from me. There's a whole culmination of events that influences the behavior. They may be a little closed off. They may even be sarcastic. I know I was sarcastic when I was in treatment. I thought I was hilarious. Still do, apparently. But they may be, they may just be totally closed off. They may just be completely difficult to deal with. But that's not who they were when they started out, right? So we have to understand that there's a whole slew of experiences behind the way somebody is behaving. Some of the ways that we've traditionally viewed substance use disorder, some of the ways that we still view it, these are always, when I get to this slide, I always make space to point out that this is not designed to change the way that you look at this thing, right? My goal in doing the recovery ally training is not to change the way that you feel, it's just to add awareness, right? So if you have a blind spot, maybe you become aware of that. If you look at something a certain way, I'm not here to change the way you feel about it. I'm just here to provide education. But if you look at something a certain way and somebody approaches you for help, maybe refer them to somebody who you know looks at it in a softer way or in a way that's more conducive to what that individual is looking for, right? So if you look at something morally, if you look at the problem of substance use disorder in our society as a moral problem that both acquisition and resolve lies on the individual, the bootstraps model, perhaps, maybe, don't try and help too much if you can, because you may do a little bit more harm than good. I can't tell you the amount of people, when I was trying to quit heroin, that would tell me about quitting smoking cigarettes with a pack of Marlboros in their front pocket. And I'm like, that's great. That does not work with Oxycontin. Like, I've tried it and it doesn't work. So you have the enlightenment model, which states that both acquisition lies on the individual, yet resolve lies on the power greater than himself. You have the medical model, which states the addict's not responsible for its development nor resolution. And you have the compensatory model. This model holds that individuals are not responsible for the development of their substance use disorder, but they are responsible for their own recovery. So if you had to figure out like where I lie, right? And you don't have to be in one camp or the other, and you don't have to be in any camp. But if you had to figure out where I lie, it would be somewhere between like enlightenment and compensatory, right? So I believe that at some point I started using and it became out of my control, right? There was a whole lot going on in my life. My ACEs score is a 6. I took the test. I thought, okay, I got kind of a high score. That's a good thing. But it's not. When you take the ACEs score, turns out you want a low one if you can have it. I was in a training the other day and this lady was talking about how if you have 6 or higher, you're more likely to struggle with asthma and COPD. And I was like, oh my God, I can't breathe. So there was a lot of stuff that happened in my past, right? And I found drugs, and I used to speak at like grade schools, and I was always excited to do that because when I was in grade school, they had an a cappella group come and sing to us about how drugs were bad, and that made me want to do drugs. So when I got the opportunity to speak to students, I would always say, man, like drugs saved my life for a period of time. Because I was in pain, dude. And there was no resources available. There were no options available for me. So when I found drugs, I firmly believe that it saved my life for a period of time. But then I became addicted, right? Then I developed a substance use disorder. So I don't know at what point that happened, but I also know now that I'm a pickle and I can't be a cucumber again, right? But I know that when I learned that I had a substance misuse disorder, then there was some responsibility on my end to take action for my recovery. Now that's how I believe. That's not how you have to believe, but I know that. So when an individual approaches me looking for help and they're not looking for that kind of help, I can refer them out. Like if they just strictly believe it's a medical problem, I can get them referred to the right person, right? So I'm not trying to change anybody. I'm just trying to be there when the space is needed. So the biopsychosocial model, another way that we can help understand how substance use can develop in an individual. And one of the things that I always do when I talk about this is how these episodes can be chronic or acute, right? And I'm not going to go into the whole example for the sake of time, but you can take an individual, a student athlete, who prior, for the sake of the example, has no markers on this. You give them an injury and they've got a biological marker, their self-esteem is going to be impacted and their social life is going to be impacted. So prior, they had no markers on the biopsychosocial scale. Now they've got all 3. And you couple that with the fact that they go to the doctor and they get a prescription for that pain medication and you have a recipe for addiction. So I think that's always important to note is they don't have to be chronic or acute, or they don't have to be chronic. They can be acute at times. So one of the other things that I always take time to do when we do the Recovery Ally training is I talk about recovery. And I talk about what recovery looks like. One of the things that I've learned in recovery is that it takes a mess of help just to stand alone. So I believe that recovery is about a shift towards recognizing and understanding and respecting one's autonomy, one's individuality, all of those things. But it has been a hard path for me to learn that I cannot do that without other people. I can't be an individual if I'm not connected to you guys, right? Like if I choose to move off into the woods, which I used to pretend like I was going to be a hobo when I was a kid. Then it turned out I was one for a period of time, and it was not what it was cracked up to be. But I would romanticize like the mountain man culture and all of those things. And if I choose to do that, if I choose to sell all my material assets and go live in a cabin in the woods, I mean, I'm really not Nathan anymore. I'm really just kind of a creepy guy who lives in the woods. I need you guys to even know who Nathan is. Because if I can't bounce myself off of you, if I'm not connected, if I'm not trying to exist within a community, then I don't really have an identity. So it takes a village to support an individual in recovery, and it takes a village just to exist like in humanity, right? So it's not something that's just exclusive to recovery. But there's a couple ways that we can look at individuals that are seeking support. We view individuals as objects, recipients, or resources. And this is something that when I learned this taking it, and I have all this reference at the end if you'd like to check it out, or I can get you a PDF of the slides given with me afterwards. I'll give you one of my cards. But I took a recovery coach training, and this was in the book, and it totally opened my mind. Because I have a tendency, if an individual is sitting across from me, to be like, okay, just take a seat, bro. Like, if they're like asking me for help, it's like, I got you. You know, just take a seat and I'll do it. And remember earlier, I was talking about how I was grateful I learned I didn't have to fix people's problems in the counseling profession. And one of the reasons that's great is because if I fix you, then I better be ready to fix you from there on out. Any problem that you have, I better be ready to fix it, because I'm going to develop dependency, right? And you're going to be coming to me to get fixed all the time. So we can view individuals as objects, recipients, or we can view individuals as a resource. We can hold an attitude of humility and understand that individuals are the experts on their own story. This cultivates autonomy and self-respect, as well as productivity, right? And that's the thing. That's the thing when we're talking about individuals who struggle with substance use disorder, right? And this is a moment where it may get a little uncomfortable, but like they have the exact same potential as somebody who doesn't have it. Exact same potential. I've seen individuals who struggle with a substance use disorder who have gone above and beyond someone who doesn't have a substance use disorder, right? I think that sometimes, subtly, we still kind of think that they're like just maybe like we're right here and maybe they're right here, you know? Like I want to help them. I want to help them get to a spot, but I don't really believe that they have potential. And that's not true, right? That is not true at all. Because individuals who enter recovery, find recovery, and live a life in recovery, and live the principles of recovery, have exponential potential. I've seen them do amazing things, right? So allowing that individual to gain self-respect again is truly loving and truly helping that individual. Giving them the space to sort through their own stuff. That was a Carl Rogers quote that if you give, not that one right there, we're going all wacky on me here, you know, all slide happy, this is a great quote, but another one that Carl Rogers had was that individuals know the solution to their own story if given enough, or their own problem if given enough space, right? Given enough space to process through it. So viewing individuals as a resource on their recoveries is really rad, right? So this is a linear depiction of recovery. When you're trying to enter recovery, it's most often not linear. It's a lot of times up and down and all around. But one piece that I always talk about when I do the recovery ally training is the crisis piece. So the reason that I talk about this is that the crisis is subjective to the individual. I do believe that often recovery from suicidal ideations, recovery in mental health, recovery from substance use is initiated by some sort of crisis. I haven't found it where it hasn't been yet. Now, the kicker on that is that the crisis is subjective to the individual. We never know when that crisis is going to come about. So I always give the example. So I was homeless. I was 19 years old. I was homeless. I was living out of a Chevy Tracker, which is not an ideal vehicle to live out of. It's about the same size as a Geo Tracker. I'd been fired from my job at the Save-A-Lot meat department. Almost cut my finger off on a meat bandsaw. Turns out they frown upon that kind of stuff. And I had warrants for my arrest, right? And ended up going to jail around Christmas time. I was staying at a friend's house. I would do this really fun thing when I was in my addiction. I was homeless. I would show up at your house and pretend like I wanted to hang out, and then I just wouldn't leave until you asked me to leave. So I was in the middle of doing that, and the police showed up, and they were like, "Hey, is James Payne here?" And I don't know if I thought it was Publishers Clearinghouse or what, but I was like, "Yeah, that's me." They were like, "Well, we got a warrant for your arrest." I was like, "Yeah, I was going to turn myself in after Christmas." And he was like, "Oh, after Christmas." I was like, "Yeah, I got it. He's gonna let me go." And he was like, "Put your hands behind your back." And I was like, "Oh, you guys take people to jail at Christmas?" And he was like, "Yeah, we do." And so I spent a period of time in jail, and lost my job, all that. You could look at my life. You could take one look at my life, and there would be no question to you whether or not I had control over it, right? I had no control over my life. You would be thinking in your head, how is this guy, how has he not reached rock bottom? But that was not the rock bottom for me, right? So rock bottom came for me. I got out of treatment my third time. It was about 6 months after that stint in jail, and I relapsed in medium. And I was homeless again. I begged my mom to let me stay with her, and she let me sleep on her couch. And I stole from her. And I went and I got my drugs, and I came back and I had a plan. I was going to listen to whatever she said if she knew that I stole from her. And then I was going to use my drugs, and I was going to be able to numb that pain. And she looked at me when I got back, and she had these tears rolling down her face. And she was like, "I don't know what happened, but I just want my son back." And she'd said that before, but that cut me like wide open when she said that. And I went to the bathroom, I did my drugs, and they didn't work. They were the same drugs that I've been getting, the same potency, all of that stuff, but they did not cover up the pain. And so I'm not a particularly religious guy. I just got on my knees and I asked whatever was out there to kill me or help me, and it felt like that prayer went up and hit the ceiling and came back down and hit me square between the eyes. And woke up the next morning, I asked my probation officer to send me to jail. And he was like, "What?" I don't think that they were super accustomed to phone calls like that. And I said, "Yeah, dude, I hadn't been able to stay clean anywhere else. You got to send me to jail." And he said, "What if we try treatment one more time?" And I've been in recovery ever since. And so never let go of hope, right? And you can never let go of belief in the individual. And what I'm going to end on here, we've already talked about language today. I think it's always important. I always say, I can say I'm Nathan, I'm a junkie. Or I can say I'm Nathan, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And you can take 1 second and see how those two phrases felt, right? One feels a lot better than the other. Because I'm a person first. But we're trying to cultivate a new narrative on campus. And I know I'm not up here trying to start a new temperance movement, right? And I know that college students are going to drink. I know that college students are going to experiment. I'm not trying to say, don't do that. I'm not trying to bash that culture, to stomp that culture out or anything like that, right? I don't think that I can do that. I don't think that we can do that. I think that's going to continue to happen. What I am trying to do is start a new culture and cultivate a new narrative where students feel comfortable reaching out when they struggle with these things, where students feel like they can be heard when they reach out for struggling with these things. And we have the capacity to do that. And we also have the capacity, like I said at the beginning of this, no matter our prior affiliation, no matter where we come from, to make a significant impact on an individual's life. Even just one interaction can change an individual's life for the better. And I know that to be true because I was an undergrad. I presented at a symposium there with some research that I had done. This lady comes up to me afterwards. She was like, "That was really great. You should think about grad school." I was like, "No, I'm not." I was at Western Kentucky University. I went to Tennessee Tech. But this symposium was at WKU. I was like making all these excuses, and she just stopped me like in my mid excuse and was like, "Hey, you're worth it, right?" I was just like, "Oh my gosh." But she didn't know me. She had never met me. She had no affiliation with Tennessee Tech University. She just saw something in me that I could not see in myself. And in May, I graduated grad school, right? Finally. And I do not hold what that lady said lightly. That was a huge part of my choosing to do that, because that lady she never met me. She just chose to let me know that she thought I had a purpose, right? And we all have that capacity. Is there another survey at the end of this? No? Is that it? Okay, well, here. Let's go back to this one. I like this one. That's my favorite speech, Man in the Arena. If you have time to read it, probably not though, because I think I did. Did I go over a little bit?
No, you got 2 minutes.
Oh, sweet. All right, I was starting to hate myself there because I thought I was going over. Any questions? No. Not on. We go to that. This should work. I hope. If you'd like to receive a certificate for taking this overview training. If it doesn't work, don't say it out loud because that would be awkward and make me feel embarrassed. Just pull me to the side afterwards. Let me know the link didn't work. We'll get you hooked up. All right. Appreciate you guys.
All right, thank you, Nathan. We'll give this another minute for everybody to get it on their phone, and then we will get Nathan's QR code for your CE up there. Again, I would like to thank everybody for being here live and in person.